Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. I recently had a conversation with some heroes in the infinite banking space. Rachel Marshall, Bruce Wehner from the Money Advantage podcast. I was invited on to share my infinite banking story and to discuss infinite banking. I had a great time. It was something of, I can't even say a dream come true because I wouldn't have expected that ever to have happened. I've learned from these guys early on in my own personal journey of implementing the concept. So to be able to sit down as peers in the profession, it was a great time for me, a real milestone. I appreciate the invite to the show and I hope that you enjoy.
All right, good morning and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. This is Rachel Marshall and Bruce Wehner, and we have a special guest joining us today that is Jesse Durham. Bruce, I would love for you to be able to introduce Jesse and just bring him to our listeners on the Money Advantage.
Yeah, so this is kind of a special time. I mean, we've had other practitioners on the show before, and I thought this would be a way to actually bring somebody in that is not brand new to the IBC practitioners program, but Jesse is on his journey towards becoming a practitioner, and he is the most. And I'm not saying that just because he's here, but he is the most talented, natural person to get Nelson's message across that I've come across as being one of the leaders in the Nelson Nash Institute. And so I had said to myself about 6 months ago, and Jesse can correct me, I don't remember exactly when we first met, but it was well over a year ago. And Jesse reached out and we continue to see each other almost on a weekly basis on this IBC mastermind that we have. He's a great contributor. But as I watch his stuff that he produces on social media, there's nothing more pure than the way he presents Nelson's message. And Jesse wants to keep Nelson's message alive, even though I'm sure he would say he was disappointed that he really never met Nelson in person. But today I wanted to show our audience Jesse Durham. His channel is Durham Talents on YouTube, and he'll tell you other places that you can listen to him. But his stuff is excellent. His family interaction is awesome. He's the kind of people we want in the Nelson Nash Institute. So I think, Jesse, what we'd like to do today is really start from your financial journey, your family journey. That's what we usually do with guests. So you take it back as far as you want and talk about your career, your family, up to the point now that you're actually on the Money Advantage podcast YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, it's definitely a pleasure for me to be here with y'all, living legends in the infinite banking concept footprint. Very cool. Me and Rachel talking for the first time, but yeah, it's been over a year now that we've known each other, Bruce. So I'm just saying thank you, for letting me be on to have a conversation with y'all about infinite banking. And
Awesome. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's so cool. Like, Rachel, I love your bent. I'll go ahead and say this now because I'm on this. You're bent towards legacy recently. Like, you wouldn't even know this because we're talking literally for the first time. It's amazing. It's awesome. It's fantastic. I'm a recent purchaser of your materials where you're launching this campaign into legacy. So, I've listened to you and Bruce before for years. And, I've bought stuff from you. And so it's just really cool to be here with y'all. When I was exposed to infinite banking, it was definitely at an open-minded time in my life, a critical point in life, I would say. And I'll paint a bit of the background, which is I thought you had to go to school. I went and got my 4-year degree. I double majored. I became bilingual in Spanish, and I went into law enforcement. And that's what I had modeled for me. I was thinking about this morning, not knowing how our conversation would go or what direction, but I just thought how funny life is that what I had modeled at home was this set hamster on a wheel journey. And I wouldn't have said it in that way, back then, Hampton, I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And my wife, same thing, 4-year degree. We got married right after college because we figured that's when we were supposed to get married, not because we couldn't have sooner. We dated right at 7 years before we got married. So she was the love of my life, is the love of my life, but we were just doing things the way we had them modeled, is what I'm saying, and the way that it was projected, I guess, onto us in a way to go out and mimic, to go out and do as well. So we started on that journey. I had a career pivot after a few years where I got into education. So Bruce and I have that in common. I'm a former Spanish teacher in North Carolina now. So I've been a cop, I've been a teacher, and in 2015, I just had what I've called my Renaissance year. I just got really, really open-minded, and my avenue was through business. I had a business opportunity in 2015 where my wife's pregnant with our second son. I'm a teacher in the state of North Carolina. I began building this business part-time on the side that I later that year take full-time, which is, I mean, again, just such a pivot change from what we'd had modeled to us. But I say that to also give some context for being grateful that I was open-minded that year. I was open-minded to personal growth and development for the first time. Books that I would have said in my caveman days, I guess I could say, were voodoo or kumbaya or whatever. I was open-minded to reading a book on marriage. I was open-minded to having a conversation about fatherhood and just different things. And thankfully, that's when I was exposed to Infinite Banking. Had a buddy call me up. He was excited. Literally, the only words that I remember him saying over the phone were becoming your own banker. And I thought, well, that sounds cool. But again, I was just open-minded enough at that time in life to say, oh, I can get better at something. And that something is, money. But that's a good thing to get better at. Awesome. So I showed up to a presentation because of the business connections that I had at that time, friendships that I had at that time and still have, and saw an hour and a half long presentation where somebody was talking about how they'd paid off right at $1 million in debt, which I had about $50,000 in debt at the time. So, his mountain was the same as my mountain as far as I was concerned. He just had more zeros because he, had a white collar background and I had a blue collar background. And I saw a way for me to be able to have financial independence, structure, to be able to get out of that debt and just go on this complete different journey for me and my family. So I got exposed to the idea through a presentation, a live in-person presentation that I had no idea really what I was getting ready to see other than the title, Becoming Your Own Banker. And then I did get turned on to the book, got into the book, and then it spiraled from there. So I'll pause because that was the pivotal moment.
That's awesome. Okay, so I got a comment, and I was going to cut in and ask you a couple things before, but I just love to let you go because that was awesome. There's a few things I really noticed, and I'm sure you're probably going to come back to this, but we all model what we see. And until we come to, and that's a big until we come to some awareness that there is another way that we can choose something different than what is our typical, our status quo. But I think the amazing thing about choosing to do something differently, like you did, like I did, well, Bruce, you were a little bit of an anomaly because you had people in your family already doing infinite banking who started you on it when you were young, which is amazing. But I think when you pioneer a new path, the value is what you're modeling for your kids is that this is what's normal. And you're creating, Jesse, a new normal for your family, your kids, and eventually your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And what's amazing about that is that you're making this new plane of normalcy, of taking full charge of your life and your finances and this way of infinite banking. Now, there's another component that I love how you mentioned that you were open-minded to different things, but you were specifically looking at fatherhood, marriage, and infinite banking. And some people might pass over this, but I think it's amazing that it seems that the people who are most committed to family, and not just committed to family like we hang out at the table and we do dinner discussions or that, but committed to being the best wife, the best husband that I can be, the best mother, the best father, this really committed to raising up and training up the next generation. There is some correlation between intentionality in those family relationships and intentionality in finance that seems like this. We just see amazing people who are taking advantage of the infinite banking concept. It usually is those independent thinkers who really want that full arms wrapped around their family and their finances to do the best thing for both.
Yeah, this wouldn't be a new filter for y'all, but I look at life in a lot of filters. One of them scriptural, but the one that I'm thinking of right now is one that I have borrowed from Rabbi Daniel Lapin, who y'all have had on your show. And, I've read his books, and that faith, family, friends, finance, fitness, all those things from that time, 2015. And I don't know what it is. I think about that too. The scriptural part there, I guess, is, seed. We all have seed, put out in front of us, and the sun scorches some and birds eat some, etc. Right? So I don't know why it happened the way that it did in 2015, except I do see some things, but that's always a perplexity. Why do some people sit in the same room like I did and not do anything about it? Or not ask questions, not line up an email, I don't know. But so it's a comical, bothersome perplexity, I guess. But I did see it, I did pursue it, as well as those other areas. And I'll tell a funny, quick story on myself, I guess. That year, I probably read either 2015 or 2016. I read the book, The 5 Love Languages, for the first time. I'd never read that before. I'd highly encourage it to anybody. But here's what's funny, Rachel. I referred to my caveman days already to y'all. Sometime later, after 2015, 2016, after I'd already read that book, and then I was on to the 5 love languages of children, because I'm a father and I want to be, intentional in that aspect of life as well. I'm going through an old closet where stuff's been tossed, and lo and behold, I come across a book that was a wedding gift to me and my wife from 2007, where obviously at the time I just said, that's silly. So yeah, it's just really interesting how things strike people and when they do, and then what happens from it.
I think it's powerful to realize that we also, with sharing the message of infinite banking, are planting seeds, and some will, some won't take action on those words. Some people will find the message, some people won't. Some people will find the message now, some people will find it later. And at the same time, we just diligently and faithfully share this message because it transforms lives and it changes people. And so, yeah, I love the backstory. That's awesome. So, Jesse, I love how you communicate infinite banking, and I know Bruce probably has other questions for you as well, but maybe to somebody who's not familiar with infinite banking, how do you share that the beauty of what it can do? And I'm not gonna tell you what we do here, but what do you share with that person who doesn't know anything about the capability and the power that infinite banking can have for them?
Two things come to me. One is because I do believe that just because you have ears doesn't mean that you'll listen. So the impetus is always on the individual. Like I just have this belief, and I have experienced it as well, that you can't say the wrong thing to the right person. You can't say the right thing to the wrong person. It's just that way. You're going to have ears to hear or you're not. I can't change that. It just is what it is. But also what I would say is that for me, I saw structure. And I saw a really advantageous structure, a guaranteed structure. Like we could begin to talk about the characteristics of this new paradigm, of this new foundation, like you were talking about earlier. And I often speak in those terms of it's a completely different starting point. Most generations start from scratch. So, what I know about my great, because that's as far as I've been able to go up so far, family tree, is what his name was and where his tombstone is. That's it. And I'm not saying that that's nothing. That's something that's cool. I value my name. I want to take, the name to the next level and encourage my children to think along those lines and do that same thing. But that's what I know. And me and my wife, like I said, started from scratch in that old paradigm. I use the analogy of the matrix often enough. Some people don't mind being plugged into the matrix. Some people want out. I want it out. I saw a structure that was going to allow us, tactically speaking, to get out of debt, just because that's where we were. We had medical bills from that second baby boy being born. We had the family car. We had the credit cards. We had the student loans from going and getting those 4-year degrees like we were told to do. So tactically speaking, it gave me a lot of structure. It was a new paradigm, but it gave me a lot of structure. So I would say that most people don't have a structure outside of earn money, spend money.
So
Yeah.
that's probably why I connect with Jesse and his message so well, because a lot of people that are touting the infinite banking concept, which I don't think it's a wrong way of doing. I'm just saying this is why I connected with Jesse. Is um, they're talking about getting out of debt, or they're talking about building a legacy. None of those things can be true until you get a hold of your own personal spending plan, and your ability to your relationship with money. None of those other things. You can't leave a legacy. You can't get out of debt. You can't save 34.5% of all your financing without having a plan, first an income plan, and then a plan to actually pay your debt, which is not as easy as people think it is, because people think, well, that just makes sense. I mean, if you incur debt, you incur debt. But there's all kinds of things in the social media and in your surroundings that are telling you, oh, well, that debt isn't your fault. I mean, student loans are a great example of that right now. That's not your fault. That's somebody else's fault. You were dealt a bad hand, so don't worry about that. That's not that big a deal. So having a plan to take responsibility of your income and your debt, I think is the message that um, I'm glad Jesse said, because that's what drew me to him. That personal responsibility, and that doesn't mean you don't get help on occasion, professional help. You don't lean on your family. You don't do those kind of things, but it should not be the basis of how you live your life.
And I could say a few things there to say yes to those things that you just said, Bruce. Like, for one, I'll say that we did use infinite banking to pay off our student loans. We didn't hang on to those. We paid those student loans off. We paid that family car off. We paid those credit cards off. And we've done a lot more with infinite banking since. And at the same time, it's not something that happened overnight, this new paradigm or this new foundation. I mean, it takes a while to build any kind of a foundation. And the bigger the foundation that you're looking to build, the more time it's going to take anyway. So it didn't happen overnight. But certainly we took the responsibility with this structure to say, well, okay, we're gonna pay off those student loans, and that's one thing, while still trying to make great connections with professionals and friends and business-minded folks, and relying on family, like you said, all along the journey as well. But both of those at the same time.
Yeah. So,
I
I'm
love
sorry,
that
Rachel.
I just love that you brought it so, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, like so basic to the core necessity that you have to have. I mean, Bruce, you said you can't leave a legacy. You can't do any of these big tactical things if you don't get control of the super simple, small stuff. I mean, that we're training a 13-year-old and a 6-year-old. We got a 2-year-old who's kind of in the wings of beginning to be trained, but differently. And there is a verse that we keep bringing up over and over again, and it's the one that if you're faithful with little things, you'll be faithful with much. You've got to be able to handle the small stuff. And Bruce, what you're saying is handle the small things with responsibility, and that discipline in those small matters of how you have income and how you pay your expenses, pay your bills, pay your debts, be in a position where you have control over the income, control over the expenses. That is really important. And if you just paint a brush stroke of easing someone's guilt or easing someone's emotional feeling about that, but not giving them clarity on what to actually do, then they can't take responsibility. So I just love that you're talking about being consistent and disciplined with the small things.
And then connecting it to the next generation, like you were saying too. And we're really close. We've got a 11-year-old recent 10-year-old, 5-year-old, about to be 6, and then baby number 4 is on the way now. So we're going to have and facilitate those conversations as well.
That is awesome. That's so awesome.
Yeah, so I used to always say when I was teaching coaching, you're not one way in one aspect of your life and another way in another aspect of your life. You know, I would have players on the athletic field, and we would talk about, you know, taking care of the classroom, taking care of your responsibilities at home. And they couldn't figure out, well, why are you worried about that, coach? I don't understand. You know, and I would always say, it's because you're not one way in one aspect of your life and another way in another aspect of your life. And it's
I
the same
also
way
might have quoted you, Bruce, at the kitchen table, the breakfast table, in talking to our kids this weekend.
Yeah, and it's also in the classroom. You know, if you're not paying attention in the classroom and trying to get everything out of the classroom, you're not going to say, well, I'm just going to learn this on my own then, because you're not going to learn it on your own. Jesse, you know, there's a big movement now, which I agree with, where Silicon Valley is saying, we don't need all these kids to actually continue with technology. They don't have to go to school. They don't have to go to Stanford. They don't have to go to Cal Berkeley. They don't have to go to Harvard to become these great programmers. They just have to be one way in one aspect of their life, so they're the same way in the other aspect of their life, and that is learning the latest about programming from whatever avenue it is, not because they've gone through a institution and said, oh, you're good. And so I like that. We're seeing that change. We're seeing that change where people are accepting that, and I'm talking about the hierarchies are accepting the fact that you can get help in that situation.
Bruce, I would say the recognition is it's more about character than credentials.
Yes. So, but Jess, let's get back to the kind of the infinite banking. What was it about Nelson's message that really inspired you to want to take this as far as your career, or Nelson himself, that really you wanted to spread the message? Because I mean, it's whole life insurance. You could have just sold whole life insurance or IULs or anything, but what was it about the message that inspired you?
Well, what I connected to very easily and right away, I would say, is his Christian worldview, because I share that with him. And then an easy second is his just logical, methodical, reasonable approach to considering the things that are in his book that I believe is going to facilitate someone arriving at their own conclusion that I should be my own banker. So actually, we just did infinite banking for a few years. So, and I know different people and lots of great friends of mine have, you know, different trajectories. But for me, what we ended up doing was implementing the concept, buying multiple policies over those first few years, and just doing infinite banking and trying to level up, read more books, watch podcasts of great people, just trying to develop what we had started as people. And along the way, from the start, so like when I showed up at that presentation, when I knew that I got an invite to go to a place where there was going to be a money message about how to do better, and I was allowed to bring people, I filled up my car. I showed up with 3 other guys, and all 3 of them ended up getting policies and doing infinite banking, which is cool.
That's awesome.
So, you know, I was sharing it before I'd even done it. And again, I'm just saying that that's me trying to credit where it's due. I'm happy that I got the invite. I was happy to be in the room. Oh my goodness, I was happy to be in the room. You know, because I didn't know a lot of people that were in there, but I knew some people in there and they already had money. I'm like, okay, this is the place to be. You know, we just implemented the concept for a few years ourselves. And all along the way, though, from the start, including guys that I had in the car with me, I was sharing, hey, have you read this book? Or they were calling me and asking me this question. So I just kept sharing the concept from the start. And people would call me up and ask me, well, Jesse, what about this? What about that? And I could answer them. I had an answer, at least. I've certainly developed in my own implementation, even personally, over the past going on 10 years as of now, implemented for 10 years. So my answers have grown and developed, but I had an answer for somebody back then. Oh, we'll just do this, or look at this, read that, etc. Log in here. Here it is. And I was in the travel space in 2020. I think a lot of people know what happened to travel in 2020. So I just found myself in a position, much again, I thought I'd be a cop forever. And then I thought I'd be a teacher forever. I mean, those are really set trajectories as far as a career or an occupational path goes. And then business in the travel space, I'm like, what's going to happen to travel? Travel's always good. And it is, but all right, that was an interesting time, I'm just saying.
Yep.
But then I found myself already having conversations with people. It's still being such a fervent passion of mine to level up and grow and develop what we were personally doing. So I went out and got my license and started professionally helping people one-on-one.
Jesse, I love the integrity of somebody who shares with others because they've been changed. You cannot be a spokesperson for something that has not personally changed your own life. And you have to have felt that ripple effect, that change, that powerful transformation in your own life. And that becomes a walking billboard, a walking testimony. And you just modeled that really well. You said, I'm going to make this shift. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to take action for myself. And lo and behold, it was so good that you said, I want to be able to continue sharing this with others. And I think if anyone is listening to this, you need to realize that the change has to happen with you first before you could share something with integrity to other people. And just, Jesse, thank you for modeling that so well.
Yeah, that's what I tell clients now is because, tactically speaking, of course, when people do get exposed to infinite banking, some folks, and they might have that to be the case in their real life, that they'll say, well, am I getting a policy on myself? Am I getting a policy, or should I start on a child, grandchild, whatever? And my default answer is always, well, of course, start with yourself. And before we even talk about policies or strategy and implementation, how about just real life? If you say one thing but do another, how much of an influence are you really going to have on your children or grandchildren anyway? But if you're modeling infinite banking in front of them, more's caught than taught. And that's a borrowed phrase that I'm giving, but that's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we are. We were talking about modeling earlier. Excuse me. And I've talked about this on the podcast from my education days and my education training is we are trained from biology as from birth to not understand the world around us, but to actually be able to interpret people's intentions, their modeling. Because little babies, they don't have the conscious awareness to say, "Oh, I'm looking at Rachel right now as she's holding her little baby," and what does Rachel do as a mother? She's gazing into her child's eyes, and that simple act of gazing in the child's eyes is reassuring the child through our evolutionary process. If Rachel then lays her down or him down and then leaves for extended period of times and doesn't pay any attention, there are bad emotional connotations of that. It's been proven over and over in these orphanages across the world where these babies don't have this human contact. And so the modeling, Jesse, is 100%. And I think that's what Nelson did so great. Nelson was a Christian. And by the way, I'd like to say Christians can be some of the most judgmental people that I know on the face of this earth. But Nelson always modeled the Christian view of not judging you. And just like you said earlier, Jesse, it was a really astute. He brings people or brings people through the journey to allow them to figure out, yes, this is the best thing for me, not judging them if they don't do it. Um, you know, Nelson actually could not stand banks. I mean, that's why he said becoming your own banker. And yet I've told this story, I want to say hundreds of times because I think I have to different people. I rolled down the elevator with the Nelson and I told him, Nelson, I just can't get it through my head to pay off my loan on my house because it's only at 2.875. And Nelson simply said, he didn't try to change my mind. He simply said, well, then Bruce, don't do it, without any judgment. He just don't do it. Now it's eating at me. And I'm like, I see what he's saying. It's not about what's best for me. It's actually what's best for society in a whole, not to multiply the money supply. And that's what you're doing every time you get these great big loans. You're multiplying the money supply. But he didn't go into this diatribe or don't you realize you're hurting society because you're multiplying the money supply, so on and so forth. He let you, and that was just one example. He did it over and over and over. Um, Figure it out for yourself and I think the reason he did that is because that's where true learning takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, you were a teacher. You didn't know Spanish until you really knew it until you started teaching it. And that's what happened with me too. I thought I knew biology and all the sciences and stuff because I read books and I took tests and they said you were good at it. But until I started teaching it, then I really understood these concepts, these biological concepts, these physics concepts, these natural ecological concepts. I started to understand because I was teaching them. Same way I was, my father he had a service station growing up. I worked in it. It wasn't until I owned my own service station and started explaining to people how the combustion engine worked that I really understood the intricacies of how a car worked because I was teaching it to my clients, my customers as they came in. And that's what Nelson is trying to do, I believe, also with the practitioners program, is he's trying to say, hey, we're going to go out and teach this in a unified way, and then you're really going to get it. I don't, there's one consistent thing that I've learned in the practitioners community is that none of us have the arrival syndrome. It's another thing that Nelson taught us. So we're always admitting, hey, we did some things wrong. We used bad language along the way, but we're going to get better. We're going to put our hearts out there and we're going to get better. So Nelson was an amazing Christian as far as a non-judgmental Christian, which I really appreciated.
Bruce,
Sure.
go ahead, Jesse.
So I was just, all right, sorry. I was going to say, sure. And I'm a Christian and I'm also a judgmental fellow. So that's something anybody has to work on. I don't care. But I do love the model that Nelson gave that I, of course, can get from folks who personally knew him and being able to read behind him. And I'll say this, just one thing about what you were talking about, the big picture, Bruce, which I would say, in the beginning, it probably would have been harder for me to think about the relationship between our society and banks because I was $50,000 in debt. I was down in so much that, it didn't happen in the beginning. But as we began coming up into this new paradigm and paying things off and getting more awareness and literally building more financial independence and autonomy for ourselves, you can then begin to really think about the societal impact and the influence that we can create by making this separate, independent financial money system for ourselves and for our legacy, our generations, the kind of impact that you can create then. So that's what jumped into my mind. At a certain level though, then I really began to appreciate, Nelson's recommended readings in the back or the references that he makes to The Law by Frederick Bastiat and things like that. You start thinking about the big picture stuff then.
Oh, absolutely. So to jump back to Bruce, what you were saying, I think what's really interesting is that if you are humble enough to recognize that you still have a process of learning ahead of you and none of us have arrived. Nelson was really awesome at bringing that to the forefront. He did talk about that arrival syndrome and that if you have arrival syndrome, if you think you know it all, that's the point that you stop learning. And I think the humility to recognize that you, us, all of us are on this continual journey and none of us have the full picture yet. I think that allows the humility then to meet other people where they're at as well, because we are also on a journey and not perfect yet. I love,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, right. Well, you just hit something I was going to talk about because we are all sinners, we do judge, so on and so forth. One of the things I hate on social media is when people say Nelson was a great person and he had a great concept and he got it going, but he's really clueless now because society has changed and we have these. You should only be using 10% basis. He really missed on that concept. Also, you should only be using these four companies that work out of the state of New York and these absolutes that come in. And that's proves to me that you have hit the arrival syndrome when you say that. Sometimes I think that I do a disservice to clients because I become too of this. I become too Nelson. I'm not an advisor. I'm not a leader. I'm saying, well, what do you think? Yeah, you could do it that way, but maybe this way could be another way. And it causes people to take inaction where if you had a more direct, oh, Jesse, this is the way you do infinite banking, XYZ, you're done, let's go. But then I know those people haven't gone through the journey and they're not going to stay with it. They actually have to look at it from a deeper process. And
I
that's what
think
Nelson did the entire time.
I think, Bruce, that's because infinite banking and becoming a person who is your own banker is not something that you can do externally and check off 3 boxes and arrive. It's something that is an internal transformation. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being and operating that you are changed. And as you become changed, you become your own banker who is doing infinite banking. And I think I think there is a process. But the reason that it's necessary for somebody to be met where they're at and to be asked those questions is because they have to personally go on that transformation journey. So, Jesse, you would, just from a little bit of conversation that we had beforehand, you said that you love talking about the lifestyle that's built from infinite banking. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think it ties into what we were just talking about now. I'll give you another set of filters, like I mentioned earlier, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, these big areas in life, faith, family, friends, finance, all those. So in this point of our conversation, what I'm thinking about is, for me, there's the paradigm. All right. So the traditional conventional paradigm is conventional banking, and everybody's just plugged into that matrix. But you can be unplugged. That's the paradigm. You could begin and say, well, I'm going to assume this journey of becoming my own banker. All right. Well, once you assume that journey, then there is a process. All right. And we could talk about that. What does that look like? And I would say the principles come next. So if you assume, okay, it is good to think long range. I should be capitalizing. I shouldn't be doing business with banks. I at the same time need to be an honest banker myself, and then I'm going to rethink my thinking, plan for windfalls. All right, if you're going to assume those principles from Nelson, then you can talk about, all right, well, what product best fits this process of capitalizing somewhere, accessing capital, deploying it, recapturing it back into this private system that I've created for myself. So for me, anything around infinite banking, I just am using that filter to say, okay, are we having a paradigm conversation? Are we talking about conventional versus private banking? Or are we talking about, the process? Are we talking about the product? And, Bruce mentions, okay, well, there are these topics out there of 10% of your premium to base, or should it even be to a whole life? Should it be to an index universal life? And all these. So for me, lifestyle comes in at the very start, which is paradigm. So maybe a long-winded way of answering your question, but that's how I look at the world. I use filters, whether it's scripture or something I like from Rabbi Daniel Lapin or somebody else, from Nelson, I get those. I get paradigm, I get process, I get his principles that he gave us, I get the product that he pointed us to consider. I look at it in that way. Those are my filters for that kind of a question. So at the start, when it's paradigm, okay, I know what lifestyle was beforehand, that conventional route. I lived 30 years of it. I turned 40 this year. And I've been, over the past 10 years, in that, from that Renaissance time that I mentioned earlier in my infinite banking journey. So I've had that pivot, I've had that change in direction. I'm still becoming my own banker, but since that's my new paradigm, that's my lifestyle, that's my worldview, is I'm on this journey of being my own banker. So another tactical explanation, maybe to give you something tactical, Rachel, would be this. There are lots of folks, and Bruce mentioned this earlier, lots of people say lots of different things about infinite banking online, and in a way, I love it, even if I disagree with somebody, because, well, then the contrast is very obvious and apparent. At least there's a voice out there saying this, and maybe I agree with parts of it, maybe I agree with none of it, maybe I agree with all of it, but I don't talk about it. I like talking about infinite banking from a lifestyle perspective. I personally use our private banking system for paying our property taxes where we own land in North Carolina, where we live. I've used it for appliances, like Nelson talks in the book about. That's not fancy, right? But we want dishwashers, we want hot water heaters, we want, the car that we just got a couple of months ago, and we've used policies to do those lifestyle things. So it's not perhaps as attractive or connects with the same folks that are looking to talk about infinite banking in the context only of cash flowing assets, which you can use it for. But for me, again, my view is, okay, that's great. And I don't tell people how they should do infinite banking. If you want to use infinite banking only for cash flowing assets, beautiful, do that. But what are you going to do when you've got to replace your hot water heater or pay your property taxes or fill in the blank? That's just part of your lifestyle. That's just part of you being a person in this world.
It's all of this comes back to the conversation that we mentioned at the beginning, which was having a system for income and expenses. And what's really interesting is that usually people think about what they make from a job and they think about the payments that they have, or they don't think about it and they don't track it and they end up spending more than they think they're spending. But there's a component in the middle of that people miss, and it's the capitalization. It's what you have, you could say, left over, or what you pay yourself first with. If you're talking about the amazing book, you've probably read it, The Richest Man from Babylon. He talks about setting your purse to fattening, paying yourself first. Mike Michalowicz talks about profit first. That other component is, I've made the money, now I'm going to set aside this chunk. I'm going to put it into action. I'm going to put it into my purse, a storage tank, a place to preserve this capital, and then I spend. So that's that missing component that a lot of people are it's almost invisible, because we spend the money, or we make the money, we spend the money, we make the money, we spend the money, and we forget about this really important thing, that if you can build discipline around building capital, you will become light years ahead in your financial life. That's what Nelson Nash talks about, overcoming Parkinson's law, building that capital. And the first step to that is just being aware that there is that component in your finances. And if you can celebrate that, if you can honor that and then make that a focus, you open up a lot of opportunity. You open up the opportunity to not have to go put a water heater on a credit card, or take out a loan for the furniture that you want to replace, or put your clothing that you're going to buy at the store on the credit card that they offer you, when they say, well, if you could save this much if you just open the card with us. Okay, do you want to be living with everything on credit, paying a minimum payment on everything, and paying 28% interest on your lifestyle? The only way you get away from that is by valuing capital and setting that aside first. And that's really what allows you then to have that opportunity to say, I'm going to use this infinite banking policy for lifestyle purchases, or I'm going to use it for cash flowing assets. Either way, the starting point for that is getting control in that little small original first step that you talked about, building that small discipline.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a little bit of credit that you wouldn't know that you deserve, because my wife and I have had ebb and flow. So we've been married 18 years, this year together 25 years, including our 40 years. So we've had ebb and flow in how we do things and run our household and manage this lifestyle like I'm talking about. But recently, one point that we got dialed in a little bit more strategically and systematically was weekly meetings, like I've heard you talk about, you and Lucas. Saturday mornings here for a while, we just dialed it back in. to
That's
sit
awesome.
down and talk about, this is in our calendar, this is in our plans, this is what last week went like, this is what this upcoming week looks like. So
Thanks.
thanks.
So
I'm saying that for people that are listening because it matters, the quality voices that you have in your life, because then you could be influenced to implement something. It's like, I do need to get that dialed back in, or hey, I could be doing that for the first time because now I just heard about it for the first time.
So good. Jesse, that just warms my heart. Thank you for sharing that. And I think what's really cool, you're talking about this weekly meeting, but specifically this weekly executive meeting that Lucas and I do, that every single week, we plan our calendar out for the coming week, but then we talk about what's coming up ahead, and we pull up, it used to be mint.com that we used. Now we're using Monarch Bank or Monarch something, I don't know, Monarch, some kind of app. But it tracks all of our spending. So we can literally see in this category, we overspent by this X dollars. In this category, we have money stored up that's going to be for the next birthday or the next Christmas. And we have these certain expenses coming up and we need to allocate resources for that. It's a way to keep our pulse on exactly what's happening financially to be able to make those decisions. And you can't be aware of the small things in your life if you don't have awareness. So Jesse, way to model that. That's awesome.
Hey, Jesse, when people come to you and they are curious about how to become their own banker, can you take us through like a 10,000-foot view of what your process looks like so that the listeners can see what your process would look like compared to somebody else's that they've went out to look at or our process?
Sure. So I like the starting point to be either right to Nelson's book or I've got a presentation video. So DurhamTalents.com is my website where people can just look me up and find me. On the YouTube channel, that's where I would like them to start, is watch a presentation. I speak, I am a teacher. That's how I saw infinite banking. So I have modeled that as well. I want to run people through with my verbiage, and they'll connect with it or not, my verbiage on exposing them to infinite banking. And my hope is that when somebody sees my video presentation, that they'll go and read Nelson's book. Like I saw a presentation, I went and read a book, and then I had questions. So I want them to jump on my calendar and ask me their first string of questions. And my philosophy is if it's a mutually beneficial first phone call, my only goal with that first phone call is I want a second phone call. That's what I look for from a first phone call, is I want to have a second phone call. That's it. Because I'm probably, if they've watched my video presentation but not the book yet, I'm going to be encouraging them, okay, it's time to get in the book now. You'll have new questions. You'll be at a whole different level on our second phone call. So that's what you need to do. If they've already done both, but they had a couple of questions about, but Jesse, I'm hearing about these IULs, or Jesse, what about the structure of, what does that mean? I'll send them some video piece of content to watch in the meantime, because I've got a lot on the channel, and I want to have another conversation so that they just end up doing what Nelson says, which is just hopefully just arriving at knowing what makes sense for them to do next.
Jesse, you started the conversation with saying that you cannot say the right thing to the wrong person, and you cannot say the wrong thing to the right person. And I think the value of having true teaching about infinite banking available on the social media channels, the YouTube, the LinkedIn, all the places, the value of having access to information about infinite banking that you can rely on and trust is that it allows you to maybe hear something a different way that helps you to begin having a new understanding, or it continues to build the bricks in your foundation, the stair steps that you need to get to that point of confidence to make a decision. And I would just encourage you, if you're listening right now, that you're hearing another person talk from a little bit of a different angle, because Jesse, you're sharing from your own experience. This isn't a canned message. This is something very authentic to who you are, that you've warred over in your own life. You've done battle to learn what you've learned. You've earned this badge, this stripe, this this ability to communicate the way that you do about infinite banking because it's changed your life. And if you're listening today to this conversation, I hope that you'll just be compelled by hearing yet another story of somebody who knows that this is the right path. And I love that if you're looking for this information, you're going to find the right true information about infinite banking. And like Jesse said, go back to the source, read Nelson's book. And that's always the springboard or the starting point to really having your mind opened and begin to start on this journey. And then I would encourage you to take action, because imperfect action is better than perfect action 20 years from now.
Absolutely. And that's how I started the YouTube channel for sure, was chickens in the background on my property, iPhone, trying to begin to give people the things that maybe it took me 4 or 5 years of studying, self-study, trying to speed up my own learning curve about infinite banking to be able to level up, and putting out content that with a push of a button, somebody could watch something that I know it took me my 4th year, my 5th year, whatever, getting my 3rd policy before I realized, oh, that, and putting that where they could, watch it. Been doing that for 5 years. So that's, and I'll say this just real quick, because Bruce gave me an opportunity earlier, and if I didn't do a good enough job, I'd love to underscore it here that I do regret that I did not get to meet Nelson personally. He was alive when I saw the concept. I guess wasn't with it enough, because we were, second son just born, tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I'm in my 1st year of business, in a new industry, new field, all those different things. I'm not trying to make them excuses, because I wish I could have, but the next best thing, of course, is people that got to know Nelson personally and that are spreading that message also, like you guys have been. So I appreciate y'all.
I appreciate you, Jesse, acknowledging that it was maybe a handicap, or maybe a personal regret that you didn't get to meet him. But it's so cool to see you. I guess what I envision is taking this leap. Like, here was Nelson, and you leapt across this bridge, this channel that you didn't necessarily meet him, but you're continuing on the same message even without that. And I mean, he would just be so proud. And I'll share this because I know that he would say the same thing to you. So I did get a chance to meet him. Lucas and I went to St. Louis for an event that Bruce's organization was putting on. I don't know what year that was, Bruce. Every single
I think
time.
it was 2014, I believe.
That sounds about right, because that would be 11 years ago now. That's crazy. Okay, so from that point, met Nelson. You guys, somehow in that conversation, in that room, people were encouraged to take someone that they wanted to learn from out to lunch. And so Lucas and I said, can we take you out to lunch, Nelson? So we sat in the hotel where the event was happening. I still remember he pulled out on a napkin. He was drawing on the napkin. I don't remember what he drew. He was talking about Mary, his wife. That was her name, right? Right,
Yep.
Bruce? Mary. And there was a flower on the table. Like, I still remember some of this layout, the plush chairs we were sitting in. And he looked across the table and he said, infinite banking is going to flourish because of people like you. And what he meant was, you're young people who are grabbing a hold of this concept and it's changing your life and you're wanting to share it with others. We didn't have it perfect. We didn't even know what we didn't know yet at that point, but we wanted to share it with other people, and we were going back to the source. And I know he would say the same thing to you, Jesse.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe in giving honor where honor is due. And, people know the story about David and Goliath, for example, but there were 4 other giants that were taken down by 4 other guys because of that first one that was taken down. That was, what jumped into my mind. So appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
Awesome.
why don't we go ahead and then repeat, Jesse, like how people can get a hold of you and
find your work.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So the best place to find me is at durhamtalents.com. And of course, you could just do a general search. You can find my YouTube channel. I'm on all the platforms. I'm on social media, Jesse W. Durham. But the best place to start is durhamtalents.com.
That's awesome. Well, Jesse, I really appreciate you sharing with our audience today. It's been a pleasure just getting to know you in this conversation. I know that you know the team already, and it's really exciting to have this conversation and to know that we're working alongside of other noble people who are sharing this message and doing great work. So keep it up.
Appreciate y'all.
Awesome. So in closing, please remember, success leaves clues, and model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.
Well, I can't say enough about what a blast that was for me to talk with Bruce and Rachel. Rachel, for the first time, had a great time being on the show. Really looked forward to that conversation from the moment that I was invited, and I hope that you found it valuable. If you have questions, put them in the comment section below. I'll answer those, or you can just reach me directly at durhamtalents.com. My hope is that you live and leave a lasting legacy. Have a great day. Take care.